When trying to achieve success, people will frequently just try to be successful, and they will try not to fail. The problem with trying not to fail is that, frankly, the odds are against you. The odds are tilted so much in favor of finding failure long before success that it becomes a great discouragement and demotivator and drainer of what finite resources you have to try and be successful, and then deal with the frustration of every time that you are not successful. And frankly, this is something that is pretty universal in application, whether it's day trading on the NASDAQ, or doing doctrinal interpretation using the Bible, or trying to figure out if it's worth buying a house. Do we do a 15-year? Do we do a 30-year? Or do we even use a conventional mortgage? All that kind of stuff. You're going to screw stuff up more often than you're going to get it right. And odds, might get you a success first try every now and again, but that's not what you should expect. Because if you expect success and you find failure, it's going to be a rough time. On the other hand, if you expect failure and work to accommodate and learn and update and grow from how that failure occurred, you will end up finding success in the negative space created by removing those failures. So let's say, for example, you have a trade that you're going to go do. You're going to invest in a particular stock because you think that it's going to go up in value. Well, if you're wrong about that, you can, after the fact, go look at the conditions that you saw at the time, the indicators that were present as far as what were the trends, were there any patterns, and so on and so forth. And then if you think you find a pattern, you can backtest that to historical data. Oh, well, what was the last time that this particular pattern showed up, and what would have happened if I had traded with that? And then you can use things like simulation tools, paper trading, in order to practice that without even having the risk of further losses involved. You can practice the failure and see if what you have done to change your methodology has actually mitigated for that failure. And once you've done that enough, you're going to get to the point where now you have only success left. You have only a pattern that is reliable, you have only a pattern that is predictable, and you're good to go. Now, it might take a long time to do that, but what's going to end up happening is that as you remove failure from that workable space, if your odds are 90% failure, 10% success right off the bat, well, every time you remove a potential avenue of failure, you increase that success space. And you're going to have some successes. You're going to have instances where you get something right and you don't have to rework the system, and you will know why it worked right. Say for HVAC service technician, you're trying to diagnose a furnace. Well, the first time you ever try and do that, you're probably not going to get it right, unless you go to the manual, which is going to help guide your process of troubleshooting and identifying, perhaps, all right, well, where in the process where it's supposed to operate is it failing? And, okay, well, what are the components that are associated with that step of the operation? And, maybe there's something wrong with them. Eventually, you can get to the point where you have learned and you have accommodated, you have grown in your technical analysis of a furnace that is not operating to the point where you may not need the manual any longer, and you're now able to diagnose and troubleshoot and be accurate on the first try. But it's going to take a lot of missteps to get there first. And so if you approach anything with the idea that, I'm going to be successful first try, you're going to get let down. You're going to be disappointed. You're going to have that emotional energy that you invested in being correct thrown right back at your face, wasted, so to speak. And now you're going to have to deal with that in addition to the consequences that have come from failure. If, however, you are expecting that something is going to happen and it's not going to work exactly the way that you want, you don't even have to know what it is that's going to cause failure, because what will then end up happening is like, oh, okay, well, here's what it is this time. Now, what was it that caused this? How do I avoid that in the future? What is it about this failure that may have been predicted, so that maybe I can find other failures that I can plan ahead for and improve myself ahead of time before I run into those. And in that manner, when you have a failure, you don't have this disappointment. It still sucks. Nobody likes to lose. Nobody likes to waste or things of that sort. But if that's what we're expecting until we're able to guarantee success, or at least get ourselves into a position of high probability for success, we don't set ourselves up for success when we're just looking for success. And that is really difficult to put into application, because we live in a society right now where, for various reasons and under various ideas being put forth, there's this concept that people are fine just as they are. They don't need anything new. They don't need growth. They don't need change. They don't need something different. They already have everything that they need. And so to assert otherwise is somehow offensive or discriminatory. And this isn't just a political thing. There's also this same dynamic within religious thought. And it's equally infantile in its manifestations, because what you will end up with is people thinking that their ability to, say, understand a religious text is perfectly fine. There's no need to grow. There's nothing that they're missing. There's nothing that they're not able to see. All the pertinent details are completely perceptible by that individual, and they are completely capable of connecting the dots in a way that is not just useful for them, but is helpful for other people as well. Now, even the Bible cautions that not many should desire to become teachers, because those who teach others will be held accountable for what they teach. And honestly, that should terrify people just as much as the idea of hell, because if you find yourself telling someone, oh, this is what the Bible teaches, or this is what the Bible says, and you're wrong, that's a bad place to be. And I won't get into why, but it is better to approach with, well, I have understood this from a text, but I am open to a different perspective on it in order to understand where I might have failed in my understanding, and so I can grow and improve and gain a better appreciation for what this text might mean. And on many occasions, that actually might mean that there are multiple valid ways to approach a text, that even within the context of a passage, there might be a couple of different ways to take things. And so instead of being dogmatic about a particular pathway, we should instead be charitable with one another and understand that there are different ways to perceive these things, and there isn't necessarily one right answer. And this should be, again, especially important with respect to Christianity, because the definition of sin, the word, and I forget the pronunciation of it correctly, but it translates to something along the lines of, missing the mark. And that's where all have missed the mark is not nearly the same thing as all have broken a set of predefined rules established by a supernatural deity, right? It's a little easier to say, hey, everybody has failed to do what it was they could have done in any particular situation. And we disarm some of the negative connotation by understanding that what we are lacking is the ability to fulfill what it is we could fulfill, because in part we are ignorant. We are flawed. We do need to grow, and not just in our capacity, but even in our understanding of ourselves and where we are at. And that's where we get a much better understanding of humility being self-awareness and not self-deprecation or self-delusion. If you're lying to yourself about yourself, you can't be humble. You can't actually know your place in this created order if you're not honest about where you are at in this created order. That's part of why I find things like worm theology to be offensive, to use that common term, Because what it basically does is it tries to denigrate man as if man needs to be denigrated in order to glorify God. As if who God is by default is not sufficiently glorious. We actually have to kick down everything other than God in order for God to appear glorious. It is a insidious and despicable sort of mentality, but most people who hold to it aren't thinking it through. They aren't aware of a deficiency. They don't see the failure of their ideal, and they don't see a need to grow. They don't see a need to push through their failure, to compensate, to accommodate, to do something different with their methodology in order to actually find success in trying to understand this world that we live in. So, to sum it all up, do not seek and expect success. Expect failure and seek methods and tools to help you learn from that failure. Now, there's going to be a little tangent I need to go on, in that if all you do is seek knowledge, that in and of itself is inadequate too. So if you're going to go change the oil on a vehicle, you can read every book about how to change oil and get the part numbers and know what the weight of the oil is supposed to be and all that kind of stuff. But at a certain level, you actually have to do it. You actually have to change the oil. You have to purchase the parts. You have to remove the parts that are already there. And if you don't time this correctly, you might think, oh, well, I'm going to go remove the parts and then I'm going to go buy stuff. Well, you might find that the store doesn't have the parts on the shelf. And now your vehicle is disabled functionally until you are actually able to get those parts. And so instead of waiting until after you've taken the vehicle apart, maybe you're supposed to get your parts first. But how many of the manuals for an automotive manufacturer or from an automotive manufacturer are going to tell people, hey, buy your parts before you start disassembling the vehicle to perform maintenance? How many of them are going to remember to include that detail? And that's an example of a kind of detail that you're going to learn by doing really, really quickly, but is something that people may not think to include inside their set of instructions when they're trying to pass on information to teach you from their failures. Not everybody's going to remember all of those things, and so at a certain point, you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to try it. You're going to have to try in some way and fail for some reason and learn in a way that is you participating and not just examining from a distance. You have to get involved with whatever it is that you're studying and not just have this head knowledge, but embody what is important in how you behave. And that's where learning from failure is important. We are seeking to embody something, a set of skills, a particular mindset, whatever it is that we act upon, that's what we will need to modify. So again, to use the earlier example, if a trade failed because, there were 30 red candlesticks in a row representing that the price had dropped, but the overall daily trend was upwards, instead of going short or saying that I'm going to try and sell that asset, they should have gone long. Okay, well, what I need to do different isn't just know that information. I need to actually practice that and embody it. So knowing things isn't necessarily bad or wrong or whatnot, but just trying to know things and not being able to take action on them is not going to be helpful. And that's where the perpetual effort to try and find success through gaining knowledge is never going to work on a reliable basis, because you can't know enough to just be successful on your first try. In any arena, in any kind of context, there's going to be three kinds of information. There's going to be the stuff that you know. There's going to be the stuff that you don't know. And then there's going to be the stuff that you don't know. And it's that category, the things you don't even perceive yet, the things you don't even know to look out for, the stuff that people may not remember to say anything about, that's the stuff which is going to bite you. And that's the stuff that you're going to have to learn from. And the only way to learn from it is to have experienced it. So again, instead of seeking success and trying to avoid failure, we should instead seek experience. We should seek those failures, and we should seek to learn from those failures and build for ourselves and embody the pattern of behaviors that avoids all of the relevant failures to what we are trying to accomplish. And once we have continued working on that process, we will shift the odds in our favor away from failure being a near guarantee to success being a high probability. This takes time, this takes energy, it takes becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. It takes using pain as a fuel and as a guide, and not just as an indicator you've done something wrong. Yes, pain does tell you you've done something wrong, but if that's all that you get from it, your behavior patterns are not going to be shifted towards preventing the pain by having a better set of behaviors. It's going to be shifted towards preventing the pain by avoiding that interaction altogether. If the point is to avoid pain, if the point is to avoid failure, the easiest way to do that is not to participate in the first place. And then you never grow. And then you get stuck in a delusion, thinking that you do know something that you don't actually know. And when in life you run into failure inevitably in some arena, you are not equipped to deal with that effectively. It is a great tragedy when I have interacted with folks who are a proverbial expert on a topic or a couple of topics, but their life on the whole is a mess. They don't actually have a universal pattern of constructive behavior. They have simply devoted themselves to a body of knowledge that may or may not actually inform anything that they ever do in the real world. And it's not even that the knowledge is bad or wrong or harmful. It's just that without application, the knowledge is in this category we call trivia. It's true, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't affect anything. And instead of trivia being downgraded, in so many aspects of life nowadays, trivia has become the way people define themselves. Things that don't actually matter, but are a distinction that can be defined clearly, well, that's what now defines them. They now have this distinction that they have to hold on to, and anybody who does not hold that distinction by default becomes an enemy. Take the shape of the world that we live in as an example. There are people out there who genuinely believe that it is flat. There are people who genuinely believe that it is a globe. And there are people who genuinely believe all sorts of things. But let me ask you this. How much of what you do on a day-to-day basis would change based on the shape of the world being one way or another? Practically, how much would actually be impacted beyond just accurately knowing what the shape of the world that we live in actually is? Now, this might become especially important if you do not actually travel any great distance on any regular basis. Throughout most of human history, we see that people stayed within, 30 miles or something like that of the place that they were born. Well, on such a small sample, does the shape of the whole actually matter? And that's a question that you need to answer for yourself. That's a question that I have an answer for myself. And that helps me to prioritize how much emphasis I place on certain things being true or false. But the weight is based on how is it going to affect my behavior. An example of something that would directly affect my behavior is, well, what does alcohol do to my physical body? Okay, well, if I have a belief that alcohol is perfectly fine, I can drink as much of it as I want, but I have both independent and anecdotal data in order to show that there are negative effects. Okay, well, now how I have set up a truth or a falsehood about alcohol has a practical implication. I probably shouldn't drink, a gallon of whiskey every night. There's solid reasons why that being true affects me. There's solid reasons, there's good information, there's practical application for that. And so having a strong opinion about moderation of things like alcohol, that's more important than what the shape of the world is to me. It's more important to me what the effect is of alcohol, because I might choose to have a drink, or I might choose not to have a drink. I might choose to restock my liquor cabinet. I might choose not to restock. Like, that's going to affect the choice I'm going to make, where the shape of the world, does it matter? If the map application on my, digital device still takes me to and from the places that I'm trying to go, does it matter if I'm actually driving along a curvature or a giant flat plane? Like, does it really matter? That's an extended tangent, but that's part of where trying things, doing stuff, expecting that failure is going to happen, but conditioning yourself ahead of time to learn from it and not just be stuck in it. When we learn from failure, when we grow, when we tell ourselves we are going to need to grow, when we tell ourselves ahead of time, I am not going to get this perfect the first time, but I'm going to learn at least one thing that I'm not doing right that I could do differently the next time. And over time, I can build a pattern of behaviors. I can embody what it takes to make success more probable. If that's the mentality and approach that we have, then we are going to find success, and not just in one arena in life, but in all of them. Thank you for your time.